Andrew, what's up, brother?
Because any step is a step forward. So at this point, we want to make sure that we're moving forward with all of our decisions. So once you get above 40%, you start to know that you get moving forward. Yep, minimum viable product, exactly, right? I know that you're probably going to need something that looks like this, and I know that my experience can get me the rest of the way until I have the exact direct answer specifics you need. Exactly. Great point there, Sal.
Yeah, MVP solution. Outstanding. Great at it.
Gosh.
All right. So with that being said, that is the last slide that we wanted to
Hey, give me 1 second, guys.
So right now we kind of do.
All right, cool. All right, so we're back week 3, Next Level Solutions. Chris and I, this week we're covering team building as a part of our foundational pillars of leadership. There we go. So kind of the learning objectives that we're hoping to cover this week. Importance of getting to know your team, both on a personal and professional level. We believe that understanding both personal goals on top of professional goals and career aspirations, they're equally as important in kind of driving a purpose for the team underneath you. And then proper placement and positioning. You know, we feel that every leader has an interpretation of goals as well as how to get there. And there's a certain interpretation of people as well and their skill set and how to achieve those goals. So we're just going to review some of the important aspects of tying all that stuff together. So Chris, do you want to kick off the top part there?
Yes, absolutely. So as you can read this quote, this comes from Jim Collins, who's good to great. But what we want to pull out of this quote is that the idea is focus on the opportunities instead of just focusing on the problems to solve. So this idea, we want to focus there is for a problem. Once you get to the end solution of a problem, your growth is stopped. There's no more innovation. There's no more, we need to continue to grow to solve this, whatever, it's done. But if you focus on the opportunity that the problem has presented your team, solving the problem becomes a byproduct, right? Success is a byproduct. And then working toward the opportunity and how to grow toward, to further growth is what we want to actually build our team toward. So with this example, right? This example is something that Jeff helped me out when I was going through special operations selection. And it's this idea of a 35-minute 5 mile. And that is a golden rule, golden standard for where you want to be running wise. But with a 35-minute 5 mile, if that's my problem I need to solve, and all I do is focus on the metrics to get there, and all I'm working toward is getting toward that 35 minutes. Once I hit it, I'm like, I've made it. I can stop. I've solved the problem. But if I focus on the opportunities presented, right? I focus on the workouts I'm going through, the journey of going through the process of working out. I focus on my form. I focus on all the things that build up, right? That build up to solving that problem. Solving the problem, getting to 35 minutes becomes a byproduct, right? Solving that problem becomes a byproduct. And I may get down to 33 minutes. I may get down to 32 minutes. I ended up running around 30, 33 and a half, right? And that's great at my best. But if I'd stopped at 35, I don't know where I could have gotten to. So focus on the opportunity. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so it's so true. And I did this for the first time last month. So Chris knows I trained up and I ran Nashville's half marathon. And similar to what Chris was saying, like we always had watches on us. We always had to set a pace. We had a goal to set and we would always drive towards that pace, right? So this was the first time I ever ran a race without it. And I ran an entire half marathon without a watch, without anything. All I had was music in my ear. And I was just going to go to the pace or just go to my best of my ability that my body was going to let me, right? And I ended up beating my expected pace by about 15 seconds per mile. I think I ran like an 8:45. And I was like, I've never ran a half marathon in a long time anyways, not military related with weight on my back. I was like, I'm just going to see what I can do. I'm not going to put a time limit. I'm not going to worry about pace. I'm just going to go as hard as my body will let me. And I blew my pace out of the water, sub 2 hour half mile. And I think it was really like, instead of putting a cap and kind of hoping to look at a 9-minute pace, which kind of what I loosely trained for, maybe a little bit less, I kind of just let, my body control it. And I broke through all those limitations, that I had predetermined in my head. I was like, all right, I've trained to this point, and I realized my last 5 miles or 4 miles were the fastest miles, just because I didn't let anything stop me. I didn't view myself as tired, below pace, on pace, whatever. So it's another example of, not putting boundaries to a problem even around you, even though solving a problem is a good thing. Opportunity is better. There's far better, there's a far higher ceiling with opportunity than anything else. So just another similar story I wanted to echo on that, Chris.
So Jeff, with that, right? How do you get to that spot where you can just take advantage of opportunities and not be worried about it? What do you do? Can you talk now? Can you go into putting people in the right places now? And I think that's what we want to get into next, right?
Yeah. So it comes down to 2 things, right? Like, 1, your own preparation and being comfortable that you've done that. And then 2, that you have the right team around you in a business perspective, that you've set them up for success, knowing that they're going to excel and go beyond their standards. So that leads right into what Jim Collins' next quote is: those who build great organizations, and the difference of being a good organization or 4-star to a great organization of 5 stars, his comparison in the book. So a great 5-star organization, make sure they have the right people on the bus and in the right people in the key seats before they figure out how to drive the bus. So even if you have the perfect team, if you have the perfect people on the team doing the wrong thing, the bus isn't going to go as far as it could. You're not optimizing your team. You're not setting your team or your organization up for success. So a lot of this of what we're talking about and what Chris is kind of pushing me towards is getting the right people on the bus, getting them in the right position on the bus, and setting your team up for success. That way they have the ability to just drive forward and without you having to constantly give direction. That opportunity, those right people on the bus are there and always going to be moving forward. So some high level key takeaways, right? Having the ability to pick and choose your team is a privilege, right? Like, it's not always going to be the case. You're not always going to have the luxury of picking who you want and putting them in the position that you want. It's an ideal situation, right? If you're starting from the ground up and you have the ability to pick and choose who you want on your team and place them in that position, I would say you're in a very lucky and fortunate position. In most cases, you're going to be elevated to a position where the team is already assembled underneath you. If you get a promotion or if you change jobs and you're going to be a leader of a new team and a new company, a lot of this is going to be, already developed for you. And now it is your responsibility as a leader to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each individual and then put them or change their position and put them in the right position to succeed. It is 100% your interpretation of the company goals, the team goals, the project goals, and then the interpretation of the strengths and weaknesses of each individual and how you close that gap in order to succeed the goals. So that's a lot of the stuff that we're gonna go into a little bit. So getting to know your team both personally and professionally. So this is a key aspect that we hit on initially and one of the key takeaways we wanted to talk about. So obviously understand each individual team member's skills, as well as their shortcomings. We talked about last week self-assessment for adaptability, understanding your own strengths and weaknesses. This week it's the same thing, just on a team level. Understand your strengths and weaknesses of your team, what they're good at and what they're not. And you need to be honest about it. And so that way you're not trying to force a solution that you can't provide, right? Like, don't volunteer your team a solution to a customer or a solution to an executive when you're not the right person for that, just to say you got the job or you got the business. Because then the long-term relationship and shortcomings that you're going to provide as a result aren't going to be there, And then at this point, you can move them into the position to optimize your team and their output. So if you understand after that evaluation that your people are great at what they do, but you feel like you can make them better, that's your interpretation. You need to do that. And it's your responsibility to put your team in the position for both them to succeed and succeed at the team level and succeed at the goal level, the strategic goal level for the company. You're not doing anyone any good if you just keep status quo because you want to keep people happy. And a part of this goes into communication, and we hit that later on. But proper communication and proper understanding of why things are changing and what your interpretations are for each individual, their skill assessment, their strengths and their weaknesses, and putting them in that position also empowers them to do what they know is, or empowers them to complete a purpose, right? It gives them purpose. And not only does that happen professionally, understand that personally as well. So if you take a minute and like your one-on-ones as a team leader, or you get to know people, know their passions, both personally and professionally. Do they have hobbies? Do they have career aspirations? Do they want to be an entrepreneur and they're doing this to maybe help fund, an entrepreneurial venture? Are they doing this to help fund financial freedom and follow a hobby? If they do, and they see that, or they're using this as maybe a potential gap to their hobby or their own entrepreneurial venture, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because what you can do is, if you help your team members reach their personal and professional goals, they're going to automatically give you their 100% just out of default. They're going to be like, this is amazing, thank you very much. They're not going to be as worried about, they're not going to hold anything back because about finding out maybe other things that they're passionate about. If you empower them to follow their passion, both career and professionally, as well as personally, they're gonna lay down on a bed of hot coals for you. Like it's crazy. Like when you empower these people to follow their passions and do what's important to them, you're gonna get the best out of them for their team. And then what comes out of that, that's a long-term relationship. People are gonna recommend you as a team leader, as someone to work with. Those are all just indirect or secondhand effects that are just so powerful by just understanding what's important to them and helping them achieve that goal. And I think there's proper communication there to help them understand, like, I will help you do this. These are the team goals. These are the company goals. These are the large strategic goals that we're going to, we need to obviously do, which is why you're in this position. But I am going to help you get to where you want to go, both career-wise, if they want advancement, personal-wise, if they need more time, or financial freedom for their own family or their own purposes. It's an amazing indirect and a direct effect to the work efficiency that you get out of someone when they actually feel heard and understood. And I'll pause there. So, Chris, if you want anything to add, or if anyone has any questions about that.
Yeah, before people hop in, if they have a comment or questions, what we really get into when we talk about in the advanced course for team building, we kind of group a couple of the pillars together for some of the advanced courses, but specifically with team building in this aspect of it, what this idea is, it goes down to how do you make the company or your team strategic goal foundational to your team members' personal or professional goals. So what does that mean? If, like Jeff brought up the example of financial freedom, right? If someone on your team, that's their personal goal is financial freedom, right? Professionally or with the company, most companies want to make money. We're going to start with that assumption. Most companies would love to make money. So if you're in a sales role, right, they're based on commission, and that person's whole goal is financial freedom. How do you get the most of the person, right? They want to make as much on commission. They want to get as many sales as possible, which brings in more revenue for the company. How do you put them in the best position with the tools, parts, everything they need, the skills to achieve as much as they can in that role to get to their goal while achieving the company and the company's goal or the team's goal? If they know that every time they come to work and they succeed is pushing them further toward their own personal goal while achieving the team goal, everyone in the company is going to be behind them because they're succeeding for the company goal. But at the same time, that you're saying, hey, every time you do it, I'm going to keep giving you more leads in this more qualified leads. I'm going to keep giving you more people to talk to. I'm going to keep helping you make sales. I'm going to do whatever we need to do to get you as much as we can in commission to make sure you're achieving your personal goal, because that is what matters to that person. If it's a hobby, that means time is the only currency we're never going to get back. So if someone takes their own personal time to do something, it's what's important to them. How do I make my team goal a foundation to them solving that personal goal? That's something that's an exercise that we go through in the advanced course. It's something to think about as you're leading your team and evaluating them.
So
Jeff, I think the next thing we need to go to, unless someone has a comment or a question, Sal, Andrew, Renee, Tony, anyone?
Okay. Chris, what were you saying?
I was gonna say the next one we're gonna go talk really about is evaluating. Yeah, I had a technique, but no comments. Or yeah, please go ahead with the technique.
Sure,
Absolutely.
Tony. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, it's interesting you guys are talking about this because whenever I sit down with somebody, like I'm in charge of for the first time, I do something similar to this. I usually ask them like 3 questions, and I'm like, or I ask them what their personal goal is, and I'm like, you either want to move up or stay where you're at, or you want to bounce. All right, so if you want to move up, or if they want to move up, then I'm like, all right, I'm going to give you some more opportunities to lead. I'll give you some extra responsibilities. Then, if you want to get promoted into my position and move up, like I'll give you those opportunities. If you love what you do and you don't want to move up, and that's what you enjoy doing, then I'll like send them to schools or classes so they can become like subject matter experts and they're happy. And if they want to bounce, then I'm like 100% like support it. Let's figure out what you want to do and what roles, in your current job that you have, like what are your current responsibilities? And then let's like maximize those. I'll help you build your resume. So that way, like we're happy, you're happy because you build your resume. And then when you get it up to that point, like I'll fully support you to move on. But I think it's like pretty much in line with what you guys are saying, figuring out what's personally important to them, and then you can match it up and get the most out of them.
Absolutely. 100%. That's awesome that you do that already. And I think one of the reasons why we do that, right? It's awesome that you're doing that. And I also think it's something can be very much overlooked because as a leader or an executive, you need to drive towards metrics, especially in a very corporate situation. Like there's corporate metrics that you need to achieve, and that gets dropped down to, team level or individual organizational metrics. And then that gets dropped down to team metrics. And if you don't have the right leader that understands that, they'll only be driven towards metrics, or they'll only be metric driven towards the team and then the organization and the company as its entirety. And they'll completely omit personal endeavors or personal just passion that they want to achieve and the purpose of coming to this company. People forget a year after someone was hired why they were hired. Now they're just another cog in the wheel. In some cases, not all, but I mean, in the cases that they are, this is a great way to understand or how to change that, and how to change, the entire environment for your team and your individual organization, depending on how much impact you have. So Chris, do you want to go into evaluate individual skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on this really quick. So we have 4 bullets here, but the main one's talking about inheriting a team. This is most situations you're going to run into if you're showing up as a leader. You get hired into a leadership position in a new company, or you're put into a position with the team as the leader that you didn't choose them. With this, the way you conduct your individual assessments, and Tony, you may have a technique similar to doing something like this, but the way that I conducted my individual assessments was I tried to understand what the company's expectations were, or what the ideal role for the person is. If I know that this person is a technical resource and they're really good at coding, I want to know that's what the company hired this person for, which means they have bullets that they measure this person against. So when I go talk to them, I ask them, hey, what do you do in your role? And I let them tell me what they believe is expected of them. And if that matches up, great. If it doesn't, I know that there's a disconnect from the previous leader, or that person doesn't understand what their role is, or it may have changed over time, and we need to update the company's expectations to match these new skill sets someone has. Otherwise, I try and set my own expectations after I hear where they believe they're at. Then I say, hey, awesome that you know that you're going to be doing this. With me, I'd like you to actually also do X, Y, Z. If they want to move up, leave, bounce, taking that kind of the personal passions into consideration. So I try and do that, but I can't just start showing up and moving things around. So I need to spend time, and I usually take about a week, 2 weeks, and understand why people are where they are and how they do the things they do. So if they're only successful in a certain environment, if they're only successful with a certain team at a certain time, what are the things that make each individual person successful or unsuccessful? And how do I continue to do and continue to enable those successful aspects that drive toward our success metrics? And how do I try and find a way to eliminate or meter down those unsuccessful environments or situations for that individual person, their skills? And it may be I need to teach them more to be successful because they have to be in a certain role. But that's something that you need to pay attention to and evaluate. The specific part about driving purpose is that once people have their expectation, they know what success looks like, they can go achieve it. So that's one of the big things we talked about communication. We talked about prior to, but that's one of the biggest things when communicating is setting expectations and making sure that they understand and both parties agree that these are the expectations that I choose to go meet. So that's one of the big things I sit down and have conversation with people about.
Yeah, and I'll kind of reiterate, communication, especially when you're going to make change, is arguably the most important, right? Communication just across the board is communication is communication, but communication across the board is important. When you make a change like this and you like, maybe they're accustomed to being in this position for a while and now you're going to move things around, communication and resetting expectations is massive, because then you need to you're going to realign kind of what they've previously been working on or how they understood things. You kind of really just need to get their buy-in, as Chris mentioned in the chat a little bit. But by doing that, you also, again, redrive their purpose, and setting the expectations just in general, understanding the person's role to make sure that they understand what they need to do, it drives purpose for them. So just kind of jumping on top of what Chris was saying. All right. So here we want to talk, Tony, we heard from you, Andrew, Sal. What do you think is the most important aspect of team building, or what techniques or things you use? Renee, I'll ask you, but you're driving, so please be safe more than anything.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, the buy-in component of it, I think is really important, and the over communication of goals and aspirations for both, company wise and personal, I think is, just being heard, I think is probably half the battle with that as well.
Have you ever had challenges with that? Or if you have, like, what are some of the things that you've done to kind of overcome that in the past?
Yeah, most of the time. I shouldn't say most of the time. Sometimes it does happen. I think we always just refer back to what the mission statement of the company is to help kind of provide like a grounding. That way it can kind of realign people's attitudes and expectations, and and then at the end of the day, if it's not something that you're willing to agree with or abide by, then maybe this isn't a great fit, but just kind of root it back to the core values and expectations of the company.
Yeah, great answer. I like that. You kind of, like you said, you circle back to kind of what the foundational aspect of the corporation, the team, the organization, what it's built on, and what the purpose is, and always driving back to that helps cement that into that individual's purpose for their role and responsibility. So I agree. That's awesome. Thank you. And Tony, thank you for sharing that technique earlier. So
Jeff, I'd like to pose a question. Has anyone been a part of a situation where they were put on a team or moved in a position and they didn't understand why and it wasn't explained? Like, what were the feelings that they felt in that situation, or what was the situation they got into where, hey, you're on this team and you're in this new position, but that's not what you wanted to do or where you feel like you should be? Was there something said to you, or did you just continue driving forward and work towards success? I don't know if anyone has any examples of that. I know I do, but I wanted to hear from everyone else first.
I definitely have an example of that.
Yeah, go ahead, Sal.
I can't get into like super specific details because it was a government job.
All good.
But I had effectively handcrafted a position for myself where I knew I was working for the leader that I wanted to work for. in the type of organization that I wanted to work for, with the lifestyle, work lifestyle that I wanted. And kind of out of the blue, as sometimes happens, my plan got punched in the mouth, right? So not only did they twitch me around because something else happened somewhere in the organization, they put me into a spot where I was going to be in charge of the management of people and systems that I had like no prior training or knowledge, and I frankly was wholly unqualified to be in that position, right? And it was pretty frustrating because on top of that, it was a bit of a skeleton crew in that department, right? There was supposed to be kind of a senior advisor and a guy with some experience, and it was me and 4 19-year-old all-source analysts. So like the ability to do what we had to do over a pretty large geographical region of responsibility was hard at best. And the thing that I think that I leaned on the most in that position, and either when you're in it or if you're going to put somebody in that kind of position, that I found was not necessarily play the fool, but like drive yourself to lean into the fact that you're an outsider and understand that whether you wanted the role or not, you're in the role, and something about your perspectives is going to lend a unique value that might not have otherwise been lent for folks who would have the traditional training or have the traditional background to be in that role. And I remember quite specifically, a large organizational change was made, and there was going to be some kind of sweeping reform, for lack of a better term. And one of the guys that had a ton of experience, but he was now in just a purely administrative role, was going to make a call that would have been administratively smart, but operationally dumb. And it was nice being the outsider at that point, a couple weeks in, where I could say, hey, we're not going to do that, and here's why. Here's my recommendation of a place that we could start. And it didn't matter that I didn't have all the answers. It mattered that I went out on a limb and pointed out what, to me, as the guy outside of the fish tank, seemed so blatantly obvious. I don't know. Hopefully that's what you're looking for, because that's the story that came to mind when you asked that question.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's awesome, Sal. So having a unique perspective, like you mentioned, an outsider perspective, is something that can be so invaluable to a company or an organization, especially when their leadership has been around and been stuck in their ways for so long. A fresh perspective, not even like you said with all the answers, but just look at things differently, can literally cause people's jaws to drop. So when I was getting out of the military, part of my transition, I had my normal 9-to-5 job, right? And I went back to a company that I worked with before I joined the military. But one of the whole purposes of them hiring me is like, Jeff, we need fresh perspective. We need fresh eyes. This is a new organization that we're developing with software. It's only a few years old. We want fresh. You've been with Juniper before, but it was years ago. Now you have a fresh perspective. We want you on board. Really 80% of the reason because of that. And I didn't know a lot, and I still don't, especially with the technology that's going on. But what you do is you have a unique problem-solving perspective based on your experiences and everything that you have, that it can be very timid to do, because you're surrounded by a group of people that work a certain way, and all of a sudden you're thrown in as, like you said, an outsider. But it's exactly what they need. It's a refreshing perspective. And it's so invaluable, especially to them, regardless of what it may seem to you in regards to intimidation. And I would even argue it's even more challenging to stay that way the longer you're in an organization, because you will get sucked into that traditional way of doing things. So it's even more challenging to continue that challenge of, not challenge of authority, but challenge of process, challenge of procedure, continue to bring unique problem solving, analysis and unique solutions to it. Where, I remember one meeting I was in, I proposed a solution which I thought was completely very basic and, almost didn't say, because I figured like all these people would have, looked through this before, right? And they didn't. And they were just like, everyone was kind of silent for 5 seconds and nodded their head. And they were like, wow, okay. And it's like, what you see is very simple. They may not see, because they're in it so much, right? Like, it's why people hire coaches. It's why people hire like trainers, to get that external perspective of what's going on through a different lens, so they can see things differently, so that's awesome, Sal. That's great. And I encourage people to do the things that you did, which is provide a unique solution or perspective, even without knowing all the answers, but going out there and providing a recommendation based on your best knowledge. I think is exactly what needs to happen. So I totally agree.
Even if it's just a question based on your lack of reference knowledge, the fact of the matter is you're in that position. So if the best value you can add is to ask for clarification when other folks who have been in it for so long might be assuming, it's value add, man. Like, you don't have to have the answer necessarily to be value add in a position that might not be perfectly right person, right seat for you.
Yep. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, Jeff, I ran into that a lot. And Sal, I ran into that a lot. Just not being the most technical person in most situations I ran into. I was not the guy with the technical knowledge, ever. Whether we were working on weapons, comms, anything like that. It was all things that I did not have the most technical expertise on. But sometimes when the way we used to load radios, or you had to have these encryption things to go with radios. And a lot of times if something's not working and you can't talk to someone, they go, we got to load this. We got to redo this. We have to call this person and try and get them to send us a new code. And they have to go through 25 different steps, and they're calling this and waking up people in different time zones. And then you realize, and I asked, the dumb question, like, you got 2 of these things. Did anyone charge? Do we charge them? Dumb questions. But from my perspective, I'm like, I don't know, but that's my first thought. And it turns out one of the guys said he did it, but he didn't. And that's the part of putting people in the right places or whatever. But hey, those are some of the questions that you may need to ask from an outside perspective, because I don't know anything else except, like, can I mess with this thing and see if it's right? The batteries are working. Is it charged? Is it working the way it's supposed to? So I don't know. I've definitely ran into that situation. But Sal, I think your example was just great from once you're there, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do is move forward and succeed. So got to find a way to do that. That's very difficult to do, and have that perspective in the moment.
And I think you have to have a form of confidence, right? Like, they put you in that position for a reason. Own it. Even if you don't know all the answers, which no one ever will, or no one ever should pretend that they do, ask those curiosity questions, gain more knowledge, gain more value out of it. Like, you were there for a position, have the confidence that you can do the job, or at least figure out how, based on the position that you've been in before. That's kind of goes back a little bit to adaptability last week that we covered. But like, you're in that position, you've been successful in the past, figure out how to do it again. Don't wait for that perfect scenario. Make your own path, make your own solution. So,
Jeff, one of the things that we get into more in the advanced course, I thought I'd just bring it up since we have a smaller group here today, is speaking to how do you build, or how do you tell leadership or executives that the team you have isn't enough to solve the problem or the solution they require? How do you go about that conversation, and how do you go about defining a way to make or find that new team member? And we talk about that kind of idea of like, hey, everyone I have doesn't have the skill set, the time, the bandwidth, the expertise, whatever it is. to solve the problem we need, and we need someone else. Like, how do you go about that conversation to build your team the way you need to?
Awesome.
I don't
And
Sure.
kind of give a little background too, which I haven't done, but what Chris and I are trying to do, right? If we think of this as a pyramid, we have 7 foundational pillars, right? You know, it's the base of the pyramid. The advanced level courses that we do, we're going to kind of, you know, combine and consolidate a couple of these individual pillars into an advanced, like, communications, an advanced team building, an advanced like emotional intelligence course. So we'll combine some of these to about 2, 3, or 4 courses and have an advanced level course, right? And then the tip of the pyramid is going to be essentially an executive workshop that we're going to build towards over time, which would essentially allow us to do a practical exercise or workshop over the course of a few weeks to get practical put practical application into the teachings. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's kind of the bigger goal. So when me and Chris talk about these advanced level courses, you know, these are the foundational level courses that we're trying to build upon you guys and the people who listen to these after the fact. And then the next level is, you know, how do we, to Chris's point, it's almost like a mini practical application. We learn how to communicate to an executive, like, hey, we can't do this. We learn about conflict resolution. We learn about these different tools and practical applications and how to use those and do them properly. And then essentially we get real practice in the executive workshop, which would be the third tier to this. So a little background to that. So
Yeah, has anyone run into that situation? Great point, Jeff. Has anyone run into that situation where they have to tell an executive or a team that, hey, we don't have enough people or the right team to solve this problem?
if no one else goes, I have an example. Tony, you look like you had something. Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, man. I mean, run into it all the time. I guess I just do literally everything I can to get the team performing at the highest that they can. I try and find all the solutions, and then that way, when I go to ask for help, it's like, hey, this is everything I've done up to this point. These are all the things, here are all the problems you ran into. Here's how I fixed them all except this one. I need your help on this one. And they're usually just like, all right, yeah, sweet, here you go. I feel like as long as you've shown the initiative and that you've shown that you've solved a bunch of problems already, and here are your solutions. And if you can propose a solution, you'd be like, this is the issue. This is what I think we need to do. I want your okay on it. And they're usually like, yeah, run with that. Or they'll be like, actually, let's do this instead. But I haven't had, by doing that, I've never really ran into too many walls. People are usually pretty willing to help if I've already come up with a solution to begin with, or at least shown them all the solutions I'd already worked through to get to the point that we're at.
Yeah. And the one thing I'm going to jump on that immediately, the transparency is key for what you've already done. So like almost a current state in that gap. If you have a proposed solution and you'd be like, well, this is what I think we need to do in order to close this gap. I need your help to do that. That's so huge, because now they're not sitting there wondering what to do. They know you've put some thought into it. And I think a lot of people, and I've seen this at an executive level situation, someone's, you know, kind of challenged my framework to running a program and kind of why I'm doing this and why I'm doing certain things. And he's like, well, I don't disagree. And I was like, well, what's your recommendation? He's like, well, I don't have one. And I'm like, well, now you're just complaining, you know, like you're either complaining or you just don't know enough, you know, or you're not as intricately involved to understand the solution that I'm trying to provide, you know? So I think and you need to handle that professionally as well. That almost goes into conflict resolution a little bit. But I think to what Tony said, a proposed solution, if you have something, you just need a little bit extra gas from like an executive or someone up to help that, you know, put a little bit of pressure, hold someone's feet to the fire, whatever. Maybe you just need an executive level ask that you're not at that level yet. That's fine. We've done those too. That's a proposed solution in that manner. Amazing. It's a great answer, Tony. Great answer.
Yeah, Tony, great point here. I think the idea there is that most people only say no because they don't have enough information to say yes. So by working on those, hey, I've solved all these problems, or I've solved most of the solution, here's everything I've done, and here's my solution, you're giving them enough information to go, yep, that makes sense. Because there's no uncertainty and there's no fear of going in the wrong direction. So I think that's a great way to work through that. Does anyone have anything else, or any other situation they've worked through with that?
A OG question was, you're missing somebody on the team and you need a person, right? There's a human gap to fill, right?
Yes, there's a human gap or an expertise gap to fill. That's correct.
Two thoughts are coming to mind. Number one, for the expertise gap to fill, man, like OG, like gangster sales training, right? Of like working with objections and not necessarily selling the boss, but asking those questions of like, almost like when you were a little kid and you did some bad shit and your dad asks you, well, why'd you do that bad shit? And you say, well, I don't know. And then your dad says that fucking line that always works, excuse my French, that line that always works, which is, well, if you did know, what would it be? Right? Like that, like kind of like dealing with objections line. And if you can find, because it's not always explicitly stated, right? What the boss cares about most in that decision. So if the conversation with the boss around a lack of expertise or a lack of data on a specific problem set needs to happen, I think a great way to go about it is like old school sales objections. However, if the conversation is about we need another person on the team, or we're missing a person on the team, or the right person isn't in that seat, or whatever it happens to be, I kind of like that make them think it's their idea approach, right? And I say that to mean when you have the conversation and maybe you talk about the problem set and the what's that need to get done, and you kind of chart those out and workshop them and be honest, be upfront, be like, hey boss, I'm trying to workshop this one with you. We're just not getting the results that we were hoping for. Here's kind of where I'm thinking. You have them kind of work through it with you, even though you have your own, like, well, this is where I'd like it to go if I got to make the final decision. But again, your role in this is not make the decision. Your role in this is lead up. And if you lay it out kind of like it takes this, and this person owns this person owns this person owns this. Nobody owns this. Who should own this? What kind of person should own this? And you effectively build a straw man profile for the right person to solve that part of the puzzle. And then you look at your team and you realize that you don't have somebody on your team that fits the straw man profile, or you look at the org chart and there's not a position on your org chart that fits the straw man profile that you and your boss have worked together to say, this is the human tool that we need to move forward on this large project or this large problem. You kind of put the idea in his head or her head, depending on the boss, right? So from a expertise thing, my opinion would be sales objections. Find out which part of it matters most, and if you can move on without that expertise. And then hey, you're missing a person on the team, right? You've got no power forward and you're trying to play 5-on-5 basketball. Well, now you talk about the what's that you're missing that you can't cover down on, and the who would be a good fit for that. And then you look at what exists, and the answer kind of emerges organically in itself. Almost like using an org chart or using a line wire diagram in an organization as a problem solving tool.
Great answer. So if I get this right, you're talking about understanding the expertise of building what that person would look like, Sal?
Yeah. So specifically, hey, we need another person.
Yeah.
If you build out what that person should look like, then when you go to search for that person, you have a very, very refined picture of who you're looking for. And maybe that doesn't stop at what skills need to be on their resume. Maybe that's also, hey, we need somebody detail oriented. We need somebody who's a quick action taker. We need somebody who fits this personality type that we can then just test for with a DISC or a five trait personality or a Myers-Briggs or whatever it happens to be, so that you can match up those 10 people that you found that have the certifications that you need and give them all a personality test and be like, well, of those 10, they're all qualified to do the job, but these 3 are the right person for that role on this team, even though they could all do it on another team. It's just kind of an interesting way to go. It's how I solve that problem for the people that I work with.
Yeah. No, that's awesome input. And I think a lot of that bleeds into the advanced course too, in regards to like understanding the requirements for setting up job applications and recruiting. Like you need to get an accurate picture of the gaps that you need to fill when there's either someone or an expertise that's missing that Chris mentioned. So I think that's a great way. And a lot of teams, you need to understand contrast, right? If everyone's kind of like-minded, to avoid groupthink, you need to start attracting, like you said, maybe a different personality, rather than, or looking at personality equally as much as you look at, the 20 years, the MBAs, the 20-year experiences, the MBAs, all the degrees and certificates. Like what type of person are they? How do they go after things? How do they problem solve? It's very much goes into a different proponent in regards to seeking talent. So great answer.
Yeah, I definitely want to add, I think right there, when you're talking about the expertise portion and bringing a solution or hey, this is kind of where I see us going with this problem to solve this problem. I definitely think it's important to add on or bring up. I understand that they may be these issues if we try to solve the problem this way by bringing on this person, or we may not have the funding to pay for this person's salary, or we may not have the capability to send someone to school on our team, or whatever the situation is. But bringing up those objections that may happen when you bring up your solution, and then saying, are those the only things that would stop us from solving a problem this way? If that's the proposed solution you have, and you may get some idea, exactly right. So you may get some idea from the executives of things that you're not privy to. That, hey, you know what? It's not just that we don't have the revenue or the capital to pay for someone's salary. It's that the board of executives said we're not allowed to hire anyone until XYZ timeframe. So we're just going to have to go with getting someone to school or something, right? So there may be things that come up as objections when you have that conversation of let them lead. But the leading up portion of making them think it's their idea, I think that's great, because they see the same gap you see once you present all the information to them. So that was great. That was a great point, Sal, on the person addition.
Agreed.
Jeff, that's the last question I had in terms of asking people it's their turn kind of idea there. Yeah.
And I think we've kind of already blended into thoughts and questions at this point too. But Tony, so just so you know, at this point, we kind of do a hot seat coaching where whoever's on the call, if they have a real life problem that they want to address for their own business, their own leadership questions that they have, it's kind of like a free coaching session with me and Chris and the others on here to help do real life problem solving right now. So we call it hot seat coaching. It comes at the end along with thoughts and questions. So any practical application that we can help you solve now, any thoughts on the class, any questions, the floor is open to everyone. So please feel free.
And it's okay if you don't have anything. Usually if you don't, or if you're good to go, just click down on that reactions and throw a thumbs up. Reactions is your third button over from share screen. Throw a thumbs up and we'll know you guys are good to go and all are super successful.
Cool. Tony Andrews, good. Nice.
Renee, no expectation. You're driving. Please don't.
Right, right. We don't need a thumbs up. Safety first. Cool. Well, I think everyone, if you guys have stuff later on or you think of things, feel free to email Chris and I. We're available for you guys in between the courses on a weekly basis. Do you have something, Chris?
Yeah, Tony put in the chat. I want to know how hard it is to run a barbecue business.
Renee, are you there? Oh, she just dropped. She got stage fright.
Yeah, definitely difficult.
Oh, here we go. She's back. Renee, are you there? She could be having some audio issues.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't know. Are you still recording or not?
I am, but I can stop.